last Friday of the semester. Woo! Well, I don't know. Except for finals. Okay. So it turns out the last time I taught evolution was long enough ago that it was an election season. And I was flipping through my slides from 4 years ago, and I discovered that I had skipped over something that I usually talk about in evolution. Last class, or 2 classes ago, I don't remember, we talked about the concept of good genes. That was last class, I think, where individuals give signals that signify how genetically fit they are. And we talked about the red throat color in stickleback males and how the brightness of the red color has something to do with his health. And I wanted to point out that there's another version of the good genes hypothesis that has to do with symmetry. And that there's something generally about most species where they prefer to have the most symmetrical mates possible. And I just use this opportunity to pick on whoever the front candidates are in the election cycle, apparently. So what you can do, and this is something that other scientists have done, not even geneticists, you take somebody's picture, like we've got Hillary Clinton, for example. I found one where she's facing the camera. It's hard to find one of Trump facing the camera directly, where he's not making some sort of face. Apparently the media really loves picking on the weird facial expressions he makes. Try a Google Images search of Donald Trump and see all the funny faces he makes. So what you do is you divide the picture down the middle vertically, and then you just copy and paste one half of the picture, flip it, and you get 2 different versions of Donald Trump and 2 different versions of Hillary Clinton. And the point is that when people have done this with individuals that are generally considered to be attractive, and this has been done across multiple different societies, when you take one person that multiple societies, multiple cultures all deem to be highly attractive, they tend to be people that have very symmetrical faces, where they don't look, when you do this, they don't look any different from the left side to the right side. It almost looks like the exact same picture when you take somebody's face and you mirror image it. What does this have to do? Why is this a signal? Why is symmetry something that indicates quality? Any thoughts? Pardon?
Because people are picky.
People are picky.
Maybe it indicates a lack of birth defects.
So it could indicate something about, so lack of birth defects. So if you grow, what does it mean if you grow asymmetrically? It could be some sort of indication that there's something genetically wrong. And this is an important point in developmental biology, and we're going to talk about evolutionary developmental biology next week, so I thought I'd start putting this idea in your heads now, that early development and the symmetry of cell divisions and the patterns that are laid down in the body plan occur early in development. So maybe asymmetrical people are indicating a reduced genetic quality, maybe. But that doesn't explain beauty marks, right? Like Janet Jackson's asymmetrical beauty mark.
Is this related to the golden ratio, or is that something?
Is this related to the golden ratio? Interesting question. I'm not sure it is, but let's ask me afterwards, because I'm interested in figuring out. So that's interesting, golden ratio. I like the golden ratio, but I'm not sure it applies here, but I want to follow up with you on that. So the goal for today's class is to be able to identify different forms of postcopulatory selection. This is what happens after mating. Bless you. And we started with an example of this from last class. I wanted to clarify what's going on here because I glossed over an important plot of data from this. So again, remember, bluegill sunfish, right? There are different varieties of males. There are males that actually put energy into reproduction. They're the parental type males. There are the sneaker males that just hang out in the shadows until a female spawns her eggs, and then he rushes in and fertilizes them together with the parental male in hopes that he sires some of the offspring. And the satellite male that actually looks somatically, or his body looks like a female even though he produces sperm. And this is intrasexual because these are all males and they're competing against each other for access to mates. So this is one way that the sunfish have evolved intrasexual, or within one sex competition, male-male competition. So whatever I said about this plot last class, ignore. I thought it was something, but I didn't remember carefully enough why I had put this in here. What does this show? This is a really important concept from evolution, which is why I'm reviewing it at the start of class. You've got the parental males and you've got the sneaker males. So this is all intrasexual male-male competition. What are these plotting? So we've got sperm longevity and sperm density. What do you think sperm density means? Something, yeah, number. It's not anything about a sperm itself, how dense it is, but yeah, it's essentially a measure of the number of sperm, the concentration of sperm, really. So would you rather be a parental male or a sneaker male? Okay, so sneaker males because
Higher density.
higher concentration of sperm. So they win there.
So then what's the benefit of having sperm longevity?
Right. So what's this concept? You can have one or you can have the other. And these males have divided up two different traits in sperm. The number of sperm you produce or how long they survive. The trade-off. You don't get everything for free. If you make more sperm in this species, your sperm are of lower quality. So the trade-off is that the parental males make fewer sperm, but they're high quality. And if you're a fish that spawns in the open water, where you're just releasing sperm into the water, near the eggs, yes, maybe it's important to have sperm that can last a while before they actually get to encounter physically an oocyte. So this is an example of how you could detect intrasexual selection, this sort of a trade-off. These males, different types of males, have partitioned through evolution the way that they allocate resources to their sperm. Certain males evolved longer-lived sperm, but their testes produce fewer sperm. On the other hand, you can make more sperm and hope that they last long enough to fertilize some oocytes. So a plot of this nature where you see this sort of trade-off can indicate intrasexual selection. Male-male competition. Competition of sperm for oocytes.
Is there one that's preferred over the other?
They're both successful. In light of evolution, how would we answer that question? Pardon?
Are they all respected in their own right?
Yeah, they both exist. Both these types of males exist at present, so they must be successful at their strategies.
Well, it seems like there's no point in the sneaker males having to have long sperm longevity or the life of their sperm, because that means they have to compete on the same page as the parentals. So it seems like it's a smart tactic to say, hey, I'm just going to put a whole bunch of sperm in one shot and hope that at least I get to fertilize some.
Right.
So it's like a way of like, yeah, we're competing, but not necessarily on the same level.
Yeah.
So I'm still surviving, right?
Exactly. So the lineages still survive. And what I said mistakenly last class that this plot was of which percent, I think this is what I said, that this was a plot of who fertilized or who sired specific numbers of offspring. And that's the sort of plot we'd want to see next. And for example, I might ask you, if you saw this, what sort of a plot, if you plotted what percent of offspring are sired by sneaker males versus parental males, what would you expect if sneaker males are more adapted to this approach than parental males? You'd expect more offspring sired by them than the parental males, for example. But that's exactly the sort of data we'd want to know to answer that question. Is it more beneficial to be a sneaker male or parental male? You'd want to just take the offspring, genotype them, find out who are their fathers. So here's an example of this sort of selection that goes on postcopulatory. Now that was postcopulatory selection in my favorite species, C. elegans. This is the sort of plot you'd want to see, the one I was just talking about. So normally, I've told you before that C. elegans have males and they have hermaphrodites. And the hermaphrodites are self-fertile. They produce their own sperm and eggs. They make their own offspring. So this is just a plot of here. In blue, I'm circling self-progeny. So if you just have a hermaphrodite by herself, herself, produce her own offspring, she produces, this is percent of offspring. On day 0, she only produces self-offspring, which makes sense. What they're doing here is on the first day, they're tracking what happens if you add male worms. How does the ratio of cross offspring, that is, offspring that are produced by male sperm fertilizing hermaphrodite oocytes, compared to the self-progeny, which is the hermaphrodite sperm coming in contact with the hermaphrodite's own oocytes. So what happens? So after you add males, right? Before you add a male, a hermaphrodite I guarantee you, is going to make 100% of her own offspring. That's what the first 2 data points suggest. On day 0 and day 1, before you add a male, the only offspring from this cross, well, it's not a cross, self-cross, are from the hermaphrodite. But what happens once you add males?
It seems like there's a preference for the male sperm.
It seems like male sperm, over time, start producing the majority of the offspring. The male sperm are outcompeting the hermaphrodite's own sperm. So this is an example. This is a sort of plot you'd expect to see if there's something going on like sperm competition. We'd expect to see this in the bluegill sunfish as well. So again, this is the sort of plot I was describing verbally on the last slide, where over time you might expect. So how does this happen? Over time, you might expect male sperm to outcompete hermaphrodite sperm.
The oocyte selects it because it's less genetically similar to them.
So that's a possibility, that the oocyte has evolved a mechanism to differentiate self-sperm versus male sperm, presumably because crossing is better than selfing, maybe.
Male sperm's faster.
So it could be that male sperm are faster.
Or because they produce both a sperm and egg, there's sperm with less quality.
Exactly. So a hermaphrodite, because a hermaphrodite's producing multiple types of gametes, maybe they produce less sperm or lower quality sperm. Maybe that trade-off comes into play here. The thing about hermaphrodite sperm, which I don't know if I've told you before, is that it can stand to be lazy. And before we get there, show you the wild type ovulation movie, just in case. So this is the gonad of a hermaphrodite worm. Its body goes this way. Each of these huge cells here is an oocyte with its nucleus, very prominent nucleus, but there's a whole oocyte right there. And in about a minute or so, it's going to push through a membrane here into the spermatheca. So it's hard to see, but there's a membrane here that is where all of the hermaphrodite's own sperm, or if she's fertilized by a male, where the male's sperm hang out. Spermatheca means sperm room. So they just sit there, and then the oocyte ovulates into the spermatheca. And now it's a fertilized embryo. Because the oocyte, the sperm would just sit there, literally. Worm sperm don't have flagellas. They crawl around, they're sort of amoeboid. And so they just sit in the spermatheca, and then the oocyte runs smack into a pool of sperm that are sitting inside the hermaphrodite's or female's body, depending on the species. So they don't have to, the sperm don't have to really do any work to fertilize. Once they get to the spermatheca, the sperm can stand to be lazy. However, they do have to do a little bit of work, and this is presumably where the sperm competition comes in and why that graph looks the way it does. Because when that oocyte, shown here, smashes into the spermatheca, it does run into some sperm, and the first sperm that contacts the oocyte fertilizes it. But then what happens is that oocyte moves further beyond the spermatheca into the uterus down here. It pushes, because it's so large compared to the gonad, it pushes a lot of sperm that didn't fertilize the oocyte with it. So the sperm get pushed out of the spermatheca into the uterus by this oocyte, now embryo, that's just moving down the gonad. So what happens then is that all of these sperm, the little ghost-looking things, have to then crawl back into the spermatheca. So they do have to have some motility, they just don't have flagella. They crawl with a pseudopod. So the oocyte pushes them all out of the spermatheca. They all have to crawl back into the spermatheca to be the next sperm that fertilizes the next oocyte. So when a hermaphrodite, by herself, just selfing, it doesn't matter if her sperm are particularly fast or large, because she's just selfing. And it doesn't matter which of her sperm fertilizes which of her eggs, they're all going to be genetically identical. Males, however, have to compete with each other to fertilize to make offspring. So what do the male sperm do that the hermaphrodite self-sperm don't do? They're bigger, the male sperm are physically larger, and they can also move faster, probably because they're larger. So if you happen to have internal insemination, so male mates with hermaphrodite, you get a mixture in the spermatheca of ginormous male sperm, the blue ones, and also the hermaphrodite's own sperm, the little red ones. And so a couple of ideas are, A, that the big sperm sort of crowd out all the little sperm. They get back into the spermatheca faster after they get dislodged by ovulation. And so after those first couple of days of insemination by a male, most of the oocytes get fertilized by male sperm and you produce cross offspring. And that was exactly what was shown on the plot. Yeah, so when the oocyte pushes all the sperm out of the spermatheca, if the hermaphrodite has been fertilized by a male, then there's a mixture of male sperm and hermaphrodite sperm together, blue and red up here. And because the male sperm crawl back into the spermatheca faster, so they are more motile, then they will be the ones to fertilize the next oocyte and the next oocyte and the next oocyte until what happens? Until they die, or until you run out of the sperm that the male put into the hermaphrodite. And then how would that plot look after that point? So the hermaphrodite self-production goes down until all the male sperm are used up, and then her self-production goes back up because now her sperm that she produced initially finally get a chance again to produce more individuals.
So you're saying that as soon as the sperm converted into one egg?
I'm saying that sperm survive long enough to get the initial shot at fertilizing oocytes. They survive long enough that once the male inseminated sperm each fertilize their own oocyte, then the hermaphrodite's sperm get a chance later in her life to then fertilize oocytes. So does any of this apply to humans? We're so evolved. Do we actually use biological traits to choose who we mate with? Like, is symmetry important, for example? Or in this example, is facial hair important? When I asked everybody at the beginning of this week or late last week to send me an example, write a picture, read the definition of what sexual selection is, or send me a picture of a trait. A lot of you sent me pictures like, not like these, but of bearded men. So are beards a sexually selected trait?
I suppose if certain females or whoever like those particular kind of beards.
Okay. So the point is, if females like bearded men, then that could be considered to be a sexually selected trait. My question would be, is the preference, well, what should the question be? I don't want to give it away. I should ask you. What would you want to know about why the female or how the female prefers beards to declare that this is a sexually selected and evolutionary response?
Isn't like sexual selection, doesn't it kind of have to do with the fact that you're gonna have more offspring? I mean, like you're gonna have healthier fitness, you're gonna have offspring that are gonna live to a reproductive age. I mean, it just seems like the idea of all these other sexual selections and all these other animals that we looked at, or organisms we looked at, has to do with, oh, I'm gonna have more offspring and it's gonna be better for me. I think with humans, it's just like, it's what we prefer.
Okay, so the point, if I can summarize, tell me if I get this right. The point is that humans, we maybe choose mates based on things other than sexually selected traits.
Think about it. We have sex for recreation. We don't just have sex for reproduction.
Right. Think about it. I like that. So that's a good way to start. So we're thinking about it. So it's hard to know, when we talk about other species, whether or not they're thinking about who they choose as a mate, or if it's just an innate response. Like if there's a situation in seahorses, for example, the first thing that came to my mind, where bigger males mate with bigger females, and smaller males mate with smaller females, because that provides an optimal pairing of the number of oocytes a female produces, fewer if she's smaller, with the size of the brood pouch of the male. So a bigger male won't mate with a smaller female because he's got a huge brood pouch. It would be sort of a waste of space to him if he mated with a small female that only deposited a few eggs in his brood pouch. So in seahorses, there's assortative mating, size-based. Big males prefer big females, small males prefer small females. It's hard to know if the seahorse males are actually like, well, check out the size of my pouch, check out, like, it's unlikely that that is consciously happening, but there's some genetic mechanism, presumably there's a preference by the male for females of a certain size. Have humans gone beyond that is my question. So are we just consciously, is society telling us who we should mate with, what's preferable, or do you think, and this is the important part, do you think that our preferences for mates are encoded in our genes? Because if our preferences for things like facial hair are genetic, then they could be passed from generation to generation. They could be subject to selection. That could be evolution.
Wasn't there a study done which showed that females prefer like the order of males who are less genetically similar to them? And
Sure.
that's a genetic selection.
I'm not sure if it's been done in humans, but yes, in other species. And it might have also been done in humans.
Yeah.
This idea that you take, T-shirts of men and
Yeah,
you
it's
make...
like in MS like 10 class we studied about this.
Yeah, so you have women smell shirts from different males, and then you look at the genetic diversity compared to the males, and sometimes the females prefer the scent of the males who are least genetically similar to them, right? The concept that you're trying to get genetic diversity. And that's also true in sticklebacks. That's the only reason I said I wasn't sure about it in males, but I know this has been done in sticklebacks. So there could be some sort of, in that case, if it's scent, then olfactory receptors, the genes that make the proteins that let us detect those smells, could predispose us to identify individuals with certain scents. What about beards? Do you think there's a genetic basis in females for preference of beards or not?
Maybe it shows females' testosterone levels.
Man manliness. Well, so, okay, manliness sounds like a social construct. Don't know if that's evolution. But, yeah, right, so one hypothesis has been that your ability to grow a big beard tells something about your sexual maturity. Men don't grow facial hair until they reach puberty and beyond. So that gives an indication to women whether or not they should waste any effort trying to court a male. So that makes sense to me. And that is sort of the leading hypothesis about preference for beards. So as I said last class, yes, beards are ornaments sometimes. You can actually hang ornaments in them, apparently. Are there other examples, besides beards, are there other types of sexual selection that occur in humans? Are there traits that are sexually selected for? So what are they? Yeah, so okay, I agree. I would think so, sure.
Well, I know that the whole idea of the bodybuilder, that hypothesis doesn't work, but I do think that there are some people that are probably more predisposed to building more muscle,
That's right.
so that they have that ability, and that might be a trigger to somebody that says, hey, that's something that I want in my offspring, or that I'm attracted to, therefore.
So body physique could be sexually selected for simply based on the idea that you maybe have a predilection to being able to have that physique. Not that you've necessarily worked out in the gym all the time, but that's terrible, but the predisposition to being able to do that might be terrible. Yeah.
If you're like sapisexual, I think is the word, if you select males that are smarter than normal males.
Oh dear, sounds like we're heading to eugenics, but we can go there. So yeah, is intelligence able to be selected for?
People are getting smarter every generation, so I guess it's.
I don't know, is that true? Are we getting smarter every generation? I should let you answer that. We're a generation apart, most of us, I think, so I probably shouldn't wade into this conversation.
Based on physical appearance, though, I think different cultures have different standards of beauty, and so that might happen. Like I recently read an article about, I can't remember which country this is, but a certain tribe prefers women with wider hips and a shorter stature, and I think that goes back to cultural differences.
So, excellent point. This all may have everything to do with culture. And maybe there are cultural genetic differences that cause predispositions to preferring females with different waist to hip ratios, for example.
Or like feet size and like shiny.
Sure, yeah, right. Preference for, foot binding
I don't
and
want to be
some
racist
horrible
or anything,
things.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is it hard for any type of selection to act on humans though, because we're so widespread and like there's so many humans on this earth that selection and pressures really don't affect us in terms of our species surviving?
So how does selection affect a population with as many individuals as humans do to occupy as big a territory as we do? So selection acts locally.
Yeah.
So it can act differently locally, and that's maybe what we're seeing, is different cultures, different populations have different preferences. It's unclear still whether or not those are social preferences or if they're innate, genetically based preferences. For example, I understand that foot binding was the idea back in the day to make women have smaller feet, but of course those don't pass from generation to generation.
But they could if
But
somebody has small feet.
Right. So if you did have people that naturally had small feet, then they might be revered in their society and their children might have smaller feet, and you might actually evolve a population that has small feet over time. I mean, unfortunately, well, I don't know, it's kind of a strange thing to have to say, but it's what happens to dogs when humans breed dogs. We select for certain traits, and different breeds have different traits. It happens naturally in humans. No one's doing eugenics, as far as I know, to force people to mate with each other to produce certain traits. I want to riff briefly off of this waist to hip ratio concept too. There's been some evidence in the last decade or so that has been under, just in humans in general, not specific to cultures, that there's been selection for larger hips because brain circumference or skull circumference has increased in infants. And so there's been, as you might expect, if you have an infant with a larger head, you need to have wider hips to be able to pass that skull through the birth canal. And so that's an example potentially of, right, maternal mortality during childbirth is a selective pressure that if brain size is getting bigger, which it has in humans compared to non-human primates, then yeah, that's going to affect the evolution of the female body. And maybe that then affects male preference for female body.
Well, I understand what you're saying there, but then you have, these people that are like 6'4" that, are with people that are like 5 foot something. So, I mean, you see that a lot. You see the difference between the man being a lot larger than the woman, and then obviously she has to have a larger baby because of it, I just automatically think of my sister, because she's like 5 foot something, and like her man's like 6'4", and I just feel bad because she's passing like 8-pound, 9-pound babies,
Whoa.
So yeah, I'm not really 100% sure about that. I mean, I think in the end, a lot of it is just our preference.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And then I might counter with, well, then there's C-sections, but that might not be the case in your family, but that is another way that's gotten around. We've been able to use medicine to circumvent evolution.
I always understood that we subconsciously we need to increase fitness. So, like, not just wider hips, but like larger breasts in women, because that's something that's used for offspring. I always thought that that's what men were attracted to, even if things are looking for that.
Right. So is it societal? So do men prefer women with larger breasts, wider hips, because those have to do with reproduction and the likelihood of their kids to survive and to thrive? Makes sense to me.
Because like that, 5 foot with a 6 foot, yeah, I'm too old to have kids now, but if I'm married and had kids, I would want to have a 6 foot tall guy, not a short guy like me.
So is that an innate preference, or is that something?
Right, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's necessarily innate.
I think it's both.
It could be. All right. I'd like to ask you to take one more, please, this term, one more survey, if you will. This one is, again, optional. It's 4 points. It's not graded. It's just participation points, attendance participation. It's a number of questions. This is about your use of tablets in the classroom. So it doesn't have anything to do with evolution. It's just your perceptions of how interesting it's been, how well the tablets have been used, etc. So if you don't want to do the survey, but you want the points, just log in, fill in your name and the student ID number and submit.
How long will this be open?
This will be open for a couple days, maybe through the weekend. So you don't have to do it now if you don't want to. But I would appreciate your feedback. This is for me. Just want to know how things have gone so that I can improve when I teach this class again.